The shadow of the Pyramid of the Sun did not fall like a regular shadow. It stretched across the Valley of Mexico, a dark, heavy wedge of history that seemed to press directly into the dry earth. The air was thick with the scent of roasted maize, dust, and the sharp, electric current of 40,000 voices shouting in unison. There were no empty spaces. The ancient stone plazas, built to hold the ceremonies of an empire long since vanished into the soil, were completely packed with human bodies. People clung to the steep stone terraces of the pyramids, sat on the edges of ancient platforms, and stood shoulder to shoulder in a massive circle that spanned the entire length of the plaza. This was not a sanctioned athletic event. It was not a televised broadcast with bright studio lights and corporate sponsors. It was a gathering of souls, drawn by whispers that had traveled through the martial arts academies of Mexico City, the docks of Veracruz, and the highland villages of Oaxaca. They had come to witness a confrontation that felt as though it belonged to another epoch. Two distinct worlds, separated by oceans and centuries of tradition, were about to collide on the sacred ground of the gods. The heat was intense, radiating from the ancient volcanic stone beneath their feet. The sky was an unbroken canopy of pale blue, and the dust stirred up by 40,000 spectators hung in the air like a golden mist, catching the glare of the bright sun. Among the crowd were traditional healers, modern athletes, historians, and ordinary families who had walked miles through the valley to find a place on the stone steps. They stood in silence now, the chaotic noise of the morning condensing into a heavy, expectant quiet as the circle in the center of the plaza was cleared by the organizers. In the middle of this circle stood the sacred ground. There were no ropes, no padded mats, and no protective boundaries. There was only the raw, uneven stone of the plaza, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, but still hard and unforgiving. This was the stage where the demonstration was to take place. It was a space designed for sacrifice and reverence, and the energy of the ancient architecture seemed to focus directly onto the empty clearing. The crowd leaned forward, their eyes fixed on the two pathways that had been kept open through the sea of spectators. The organizing committee, a small group of traditional martial artists and cultural preservationists from Mexico City, stood near the edge of the clearing. They had spent weeks. An Aztec warrior challenged Bruce Lee in the shadow of the Pyramid One, coordinating this meeting, acting as intermediaries between two men who had never met but whose reputations had made this confrontation inevitable. They carried no weapons and wore simple white cotton clothing, their faces grave with the understanding of what they had set in motion. One of them stepped forward to the center of the ring, his voice rising without the aid of a microphone, carrying across the silent stone plazas through the sheer force of the surrounding acoustic architecture. He spoke of the history of the land, of the warriors who had trained in these valleys long before the Spanish sails appeared on the horizon. He spoke of the modern systems of combat, of the arts that had traveled from the East to find a home in the Americas. And finally, he spoke of the two men who had agreed to test their skills not for money, not for glory, but to find the truth of their respective philosophies. When he finished, he stepped back into the crowd, and the silence that followed was so absolute that the rustle of the dry grass at the base of the pyramid could be heard clearly. From the southern entrance of the plaza, the challenger made his way into the circle. His name was Jaguar of the Sun, a man who had discarded his Spanish name to reclaim the heritage of his ancestors. He was a colossal figure, standing 6 feet and 3 inches tall, his body weighing 220 pounds of dense, functional muscle. His skin was the color of dark copper, marked by scars from years of conditioning against stone and timber. He did not wear modern, athletic gear. He wore a traditional loincloth of woven agave fiber, his shins wrapped in thick leather guards, and his wrists bound with cords of raw hemp. His training was the stuff of legend in the mountain regions of Guerrero and Michoacan. For 20 years, he had studied the remnants of the Aztec martial systems, reconstruction efforts, based on codices and oral traditions preserved by remote families. His conditioning was brutal, designed to recreate the physical capabilities of the elite eagle and jaguar warriors. He routinely kicked young pine trees until the wood splintered, punched bags filled with coarse river sand until his knuckles were thick with protective calcium, and ran up the steep stone steps of the local ruins carrying boulders on his shoulders. The records of his private challenges were whispered in the boxing gyms of Mexico City and the wrestling pits of Guadalajara. He had faced professional middleweights, heavyweights, and traditional practitioners of every style that had arrived in Mexico. Not one had managed to stand before him for more than a brief sequence. His style was not designed for points or sport. It was a devastating application of direct force, heavy sweeps, and bone-crushing grappling techniques that utilized his immense physical leverage. He believed that the modern martial arts of the West and East had become soft, diluted by rules and the safety of the ring. An Aztec warrior challenged Bruce Lee in the shadow of the Pyramid II. He carried himself with the absolute gravity of a temple statue. His eyes were dark and steady, reflecting no anger, no excitement, and no doubt. He was a man who viewed combat as a form of sacred geometry, a physical manifestation of the natural forces that ruled the universe. To him, the pyramid behind him was not a tourist attraction. It was a physical reminder of the enduring power of stone, gravity, and the sun. He took his position at the southern edge of the ring, his bare feet gripping the warm stone, his arms hanging relaxed at his sides, but humming with latent power. The crowd watched him with a mixture of awe and national pride. He represented something ancient and unbroken, a physical link to a past that had been buried but never truly forgotten. The young man in the audience looked at his massive chest and his scarred shoulders and saw the embodiment of the legends they had been told since childhood. He was the mountain, the stone that did not yield to the storm, the physical representation of the earth itself. From the northern path, Bruce Lee entered the clearing. He did not wear a martial arts uniform, nor did he carry any symbols of status or rank. He wore simple black trousers and a thin, dark, gray button-up shirt, his feet clad in light, flexible shoes designed for movement. He was 30 years old, standing 5 feet and 7 inches tall, his weight barely reaching 138 pounds. Compared to the massive figure of the Aztec warrior, he looked almost delicate, a reed standing in the shadow of an ancient oak tree. But those who knew how to look did not see weakness. They saw a body that had been stripped of every ounce of excess tissue, leaving only the essential machinery of speed and precision. His shoulders were remarkably wide for his frame, his back muscles shifting under his shirt like coiled cables. His movements were completely devoid of the heavy, deliberate weight of his opponent. He walked into the circle with a light, effortless stride, his weight centered, his eyes taking in the entire scene with a calm, analytical gaze. Bruce Lee had spent his life dismantling the traditions that his opponent had spent a lifetime reconstructing. To Bruce, style was a prison, a set of rules that limited a human being's ability to adapt to the reality of the moment. He had studied Wing Chun, boxing, fencing, and every system of combat he could find, absorbing what was useful, rejecting what was useless, and creating a philosophy that transcended the boundaries of nationality and tradition. He had come to Mexico, not to defend a system, but to demonstrate that adaptability and speed would always triumph over rigid strength and historical weight. He stood at the northern edge of the circle, looking across the 10 feet of open stone at his opponent. He did not take a traditional stance. He stood naturally, his hands relaxed, his chin. An Aztec warrior challenged Bruce Lee in the shadow of the Pyramid III, slightly tucked, his breathing deep and silent. He looked up at the massive pyramid rising behind the warrior, acknowledging the grandeur of the setting but refusing to let the scale of the architecture dictate his state of mind. He was completely present, his attention focused entirely on the physical reality of the man standing in front of him. The size contrast was so extreme that it drew a collective murmur from the 40,000 spectators. The difference in weight was nearly 80 pounds. The difference in height was 8 inches. It was a physical relationship that, in the minds of most onlookers, could only have one logical outcome. The heavy warrior would simply walk through the smaller man, using his mass to crush any resistance. But those in the crowd who had studied the principles of movement remained silent, their eyes tracking the subtle differences in the way the two men gripped the earth. The challenger took a step forward, his voice deep and resonant, matching the acoustic weight of the ancient plaza. "I have watched your demonstrations in the northern cities, Bruce Lee," the warrior said. "You speak of being like water, of having no form, of adapting to all things. But water must always yield to the stone. The river must flow around the mountain. Today, I am the stone. I am the ancient earth that does not move for the river. I challenge your flow with the solid reality of my ancestors, Bruce Lee." The 40,000 witnesses held their breath, the words carrying to the highest steps of the pyramid. The silence that followed was thick with the weight of the challenge. It was a philosophical dispute that could only be settled through the medium of direct physical action. Bruce Lee listened to the translator's words, his expression remaining completely unchanged. He did not smile. He did not show anger, and he did not shift his posture. He waited until the translator had finished, then took a single step forward, his voice quiet but perfectly clear in the silent air. "Water is soft," Bruce Lee said, "but it is the softest thing in the world that can wear away the hardest stone. The river does not fight the mountain. It finds the path of least resistance and eventually carries the mountain to the sea. You are fighting the man you expect, the monument of your history. But I, Bruce Lee, am not a monument. I have no form. Try to strike the water, and you will only exhaust yourself. Show me your stone." An Aztec warrior challenged Bruce Lee in the shadow of the Pyramid 4. The warrior nodded once, a gesture of respect that acknowledged the clarity of the response. He did not need further words. He raised his hands, his fists clenching with a sound like leather binding wood. He settled into a deep, powerful stance, his center of gravity lowered, his lead shoulder forward, his eyes locked onto Bruce Lee's center line. The referee, a veteran martial artist from the valley, stepped between them for a brief moment. He checked that both men were ready, his hands raised to the sky. He looked at the massive crowd, then at the two combatants, and lowered his hands with a single, decisive movement. The demonstration had begun. The Aztec warrior moved with a sudden, explosive speed that surprised those who had assumed his size would make him slow. He did not lunge or rush blindly. He advanced with a calculated, crushing movement, closing the distance with a powerful step that seemed to vibrate through the stone of the plaza. He threw a massive lead hook, his fist aimed directly at Bruce Lee's jaw, a strike that carried the momentum of his entire 220-pound frame. Bruce Lee was not there when the fist arrived. He did not block, he did not parry, and he did not retreat. He simply stepped offline by a fraction of an inch, his movement so minimal that the warrior's fist grazed the fabric of his shirt without making contact with his body. The speed of the evasion was so absolute that to the spectators on the pyramid, it appeared as though the smaller man had simply vanished for a split second. The warrior did not hesitate. As his lead hook missed, he rotated his hips with immense force, launching a devastating low sweep with his trailing leg, aimed at Bruce Lee's lead knee. It was a strike designed to break the joint, utilizing the hardened bone of his shin. Again, Bruce Lee did not retreat. He lifted his lead leg just enough for the sweep to pass, harmlessly beneath his foot, his weight momentarily balanced on his trailing leg with perfect stability. In the same fluid motion, as his foot returned to the stone, he executed a rapid lead hand flick, his fingers brushing past the warrior's eyes. It was not a strike intended to blind or injure, but a demonstration of speed that forced the warrior to blink and pull his head back. Reflexively, the crowd let out a collective gasp. In the space of 3 seconds, the giant had thrown 2 potentially lethal strikes, and the smaller man had evaded both with movements that looked like a casual dance, leaving himself in a position where he could have landed a counterstrike had he chosen to do so. An Aztec warrior challenged Bruce Lee in the shadow of the Pyramid 5. The warrior stepped back, his eyes narrowing as he analyzed the exchange. He had expected resistance, a solid block, or a struggle for leverage. Instead, he had encountered empty air, a vacuum that swallowed his force without returning any resistance. He realized that the stories of the smaller man's speed were not exaggerated. They were understatements. The heat of the sun seemed to intensify as the warrior adjusted his strategy. He understood that wild, singular strikes would not connect with an opponent who moved like mist. He needed to restrict the smaller man's space, to trap him against the edge of the human circle, and to use his massive reach to create a net of strikes that could not be evaded by a simple lateral movement. He advanced again, this time throwing a series of rapid, short punches. His elbows kept close to his ribs, protecting his center line while maintaining a continuous offensive pressure. He threw a jab, a cross, and a short uppercut, each technique executed with a compact power that left no openings. Bruce Lee retreated, but his retreat was not a panic-stricken flight. It was a controlled, rhythmic movement that maintained the exact distance required to keep the warrior's fists inches from his face. He moved with the precision of a fencer, his feet gliding across the uneven stone without ever losing his balance or his center of gravity. The 40,000 witnesses were completely silent, their eyes tracking the rapid sequence of movements. The sound of the warrior's breathing was heavy and rhythmic, like the sound of bellows in a forge, while Bruce Lee's breathing remained silent, his body moving with an economy of effort that suggested he was barely working. The warrior pressed harder, committing his full weight to a rushing combination, intending to force Bruce Lee to make a defensive error. He threw a powerful horizontal elbow strike, a technique developed in the close quarters fighting of the ancient military orders, designed to shatter the collarbone or the jaw. Bruce Lee recognized the commitment of the movement. Instead of moving away, he stepped inside the arc of the elbow, entering the closest range of combat where the weapon had no leverage. His hands moved with the speed of a striking cobra, executing a pack-saw deflection that slapped the warrior's bicep, redirecting the force of the elbow away from his body. With his other hand, Bruce Lee executed a rapid, light palm strike to the warrior's ribcage. The strike made a sharp, cracking sound as it connected with the dense muscle, delivering enough force to make the giant stumble back 3 steps, his breathing momentarily interrupted by the impact. An Aztec warrior challenged Bruce Lee in the shadow of the Pyramid 6. The warrior recovered his balance quickly, his face darkening with a mixture of frustration and rising respect. He had been hit, not with a heavy, crushing blow, but with a sharp, concentrated force that had penetrated his muscular shield. He looked at the smaller man, who had already returned to his relaxed, ready stance, showing no sign of triumph or exertion. "You are fast, Bruce Lee," the warrior said, his voice lower now. "But a light tap cannot bring down the stone temple. You must do more than touch me to win this day." "I have no desire to bring down your temple," Bruce Lee replied. "I, Bruce Lee, only want to show you that the temple is empty. If you do not adapt, your strength is only a monument to your own defeat." The warrior roared, a sound that echoed off the stone steps of the pyramid, and launched himself into his final, most desperate offensive. He did not throw punches or kicks. He threw himself forward in a powerful wrestling charge, intending to grab Bruce Lee, to lift him from the ground, and to use his immense weight to crush him against the stone plaza. It was a dangerous moment. If the warrior managed to establish a grip, his weight and strength advantage would make escape nearly impossible for a man of Bruce Lee's size. The 40,000 spectators leaned forward, many of them standing on their toes, expecting the physical climax of the match. Bruce Lee stood his ground until the giant was less than 2 feet away, his massive arms spreading wide to trap him. At the critical fraction of a second, when the warrior's momentum was fully committed and could not be reversed, Bruce Lee executed the core concept of his personal philosophy, the intercepting fist. Without any visible windup, his lead right hand shot forward like an arrow released from a bow. The strike was perfectly straight, traveling along the shortest distance between 2 points, aimed precisely at the nerve cluster in the center of the warrior's chest, just below the collarbone. The speed of the punch was such that it was invisible to the vast majority of the crowd. They only saw the result. The massive, rushing warrior stopped dead in his tracks, as though he had run into an invisible steel barrier. His momentum was completely halted, his head snapping forward, his eyes wide with sudden, intense shock. An Aztec warrior challenged Bruce Lee in the shadow of the Pyramid 7. The impact of the intercepting fist did not knock the warrior backward. Instead, it delivered its energy directly into his skeletal structure, disrupting his kinetic chain and neutralizing his nervous system's ability to command his muscles. For a long, agonizing second, the giant stood, frozen, his arms still spread wide, his body trembling under the weight of the force that had been injected into his center. Then his knees buckled. He did not fall like a defeated boxer, crashing heavily to the canvas. He sank to his knees slowly, his hands coming down to grip the warm stone of the plaza, his head hanging low as he fought to draw air into his lungs. The intercepting strike had temporarily paralyzed his diaphragm, leaving him conscious but completely unable to move or breathe. The silence that fell over the plaza was absolute. 40,000 people stood frozen, their eyes locked on the image of the undefeated champion of the mountains, the giant of the sun, kneeling on the ancient stone in front of a man who looked like he had barely begun to train. It was an outcome that defied every physical expectation, every national hope, and every traditional belief. Bruce Lee did not celebrate. He did not raise his fists to the crowd, and he did not show any sign of pride. He stood quietly above the kneeling warrior, his hands returning to his sides, his breathing deep and steady. He waited, his attention focused entirely on the recovery of his opponent, his face showing only a profound, quiet respect. 10 seconds passed, the silence in the plaza so deep that the sound of the wind sweeping off the dry plains could be heard clearly. Slowly, the warrior's diaphragm began to release, his chest expanding as he pulled in a ragged, painful breath. He shook his head, trying to clear the fog of the impact, his hand still gripping the stone as he stabilized his body. He looked up at Bruce Lee, his eyes no longer reflecting the hard, unyielding certainty of stone, but the deep, quiet clarity of water that is settled after storm. He had met a force that did not fight his strength, but utilized it to reveal his own limitations. The warrior slowly rose to his feet, his movements heavy and humbled, but his dignity completely intact. He did not look at the crowd, nor did he look at the pyramid that rose behind. An Aztec warrior challenged Bruce Lee in the shadow of the Pyramid 8. He looked only at the small Chinese man, who had shown him a level of mastery he had not believed existed. He bowed, a deep, formal gesture that was not required by any rules, but was demanded by his own code of honor. I believed that the stone was the strongest thing in the world, the warrior said, his voice quiet but carrying to those nearest the ring. But today, the water and your words, Bruce Lee, have shown me that rigidity is only the illusion of strength. You did not fight me, you allowed my own strength to defeat me. Bruce Lee returned the bow, his gesture matching the depth and respect of his opponent. The stone is strong, Bruce Lee said, but it can only stand in one place. It cannot adapt to the changing seasons, and it cannot flow when the river rises. Real strength, as I, Bruce Lee, always say, is not about resisting force. It is about understanding force, about becoming so sensitive to your opponent's movement that his attack becomes your opportunity. He reached out, his hand open, offering a gesture of friendship. The warrior looked at the hand, then took it in a firm, respectful grip. The contrast between their hands, one massive and thick, with scars, the other small and smooth but humming with energy, was a physical summary of the entire demonstration. You must teach me this flow, the warrior said. I have spent my life building a temple of stone. Now I want to learn how to make it live. I cannot teach you a system, Bruce Lee replied, because systems are only another form of stone. But I, Bruce Lee, can show you how to find your own flow, how to empty your cup so that it can be filled with something new. We are all students of the same truth. The crowd, realizing that the confrontation had ended not in violence, but in a profound, demonstration of mutual respect, erupted into a wave of applause that seemed to shake the very foundations of the Pyramid of the Sun. 40,000 voices, previously divided by national pride and skepticism, united in a single, roaring acknowledgement of the mastery they had witnessed. An Aztec warrior challenged Bruce Lee in the shadow of the Pyramid 9. The demonstration at Teotihuacan became a legend that was passed down through the martial art schools of Mexico for generations. It was not recorded by professional television crews, and the official sports media of the era largely ignored it, dismissing it as a local exhibition without competitive significance. But the 40,000 witnesses who stood on the stone steps of the pyramids that day knew what they had seen. They had seen a man who defied the laws of size, strength, and tradition, not through the application of brute force, but through the perfect realization of a philosophy that viewed combat as an art of relationship rather than conquest. They had seen the ancient stone yield to the flowing water, and they had learned that real mastery is not about being unbreakable, but about being unbendable. The Aztec warrior, Jaguar of the Sun, did not return to his isolated training in the mountains. He traveled north, spending several months studying the concepts of Jeet Kune Do, integrating the principles of intercepting and economy of motion into his reconstruction of the ancient arts. He became an advocate for a living, adaptive approach to traditional systems, teaching his students that heritage is not a set of rules to be followed blindly, but a foundation to be built upon. Bruce Lee returned to his work, his journey eventually leading him back to Hong Kong and the global stage that would make his philosophy a household word. He never spoke of the match at Teotihuacan as a victory, always referring to it as a beautiful exchange of energy between two men who respected the warrior spirit. 40,000 witnesses, one ancient pyramid, one giant of stone, and one man who showed the world that when you are like water, there's no limit to what you can overcome, and no boundary that can hold your flow.